Well, hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us for this latest CARE session. We launched CARE sessions during the summer as an opportunity for you to connect with us at CARE and for us to share more about the causes that we are working on. And it's been absolutely brilliant to be able to spend time with so many of you looking at a wide range of different causes, from human trafficking to free speech, and more recently, compassionate campaigning on abortion. And today, we are looking at another cause, one that we've not spoken about massively on CARE sessions before. And to help me talk through this session and to guide our discussion, bringing their particular expertise, I am delighted that today I'm joined by our National Director for Care for Scotland, Dr. Stuart Weir, and our Senior Policy Officer for Human Trafficking, Louise Gleish. Louise, Stuart, welcome to CARE Sessions.
Thanks, James.
Good to be here.
Now, we're going to be talking in particular about prostitution, which is perhaps not a subject that you will have thought much about or even heard much about. But the purpose of this session is to look at some of the biblical principles that we believe helped us to engage with this particular cause. And then we want to narrow in and focus on some developments in this particular area up in Scotland, because there is an opportunity for some of you, if you're joining us from Scotland, to stand with us and to help us seek positive change when it comes to how the law deals and addresses the issue of prostitution. And so that's what this session is going to look like. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer section, and then I'll give you some more information about resources that we're going to be sending your way. Let's crack right on. And by the way, if you're just joining us on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter, which is a new development, you are very, very welcome. One thing we would love, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments just under the video. Let us know where you're joining us from. It's absolutely brilliant for us to go through afterwards and see that we've had people coming from all different parts of the United Kingdom. In our first section, I want us to look at the wider conversation around prostitution. And Stuart, I'm going to come to you first. You've been with CARE for a number of years. You're speaking in churches, engaging with policymakers and church leaders. In general, when you think about the cause of prostitution and when you speak about that in churches, what is the kind of reaction that you're used to experiencing?
Yeah, well, I think most people haven't really considered the issue before. I think that's the dominant thing that I notice, is that it's mind-boggling for them. It's maybe a bit shocking even that it's being talked about out loud. Is one of those issues that we don't tend to discuss. And so for those who do feedback, who do get into conversation with us specifically afterwards, I think that there's a sense of defaulting to, for some people, this would be the dominant kind of response, a default position that perhaps women in prostitution are the locus of the problem, that they're the temptress, if you like, that kind of figure who seduces men, etc., etc. That would be quite a common response. All of this is anecdotal usually, and after sermons or talks that we give. However, there is another type of person that I would meet who has a more compassionate view of women in prostitution. Sometimes these people are involved in ministries trying to support women in prostitution, trying to show a compassionate response. And even for those who aren't active in a ministry, for example, you would find some people that would, given the chance, want to advocate on their behalf, would see them as valuable human beings and want to stand in the gap and be there for them and see them as valuable human beings. So there's a mixture there.
Louise, in your experience, does that match up with what Stuart's just said in your engagement with fellow Christians, church leaders, policymakers?
Yes, I think in terms of policymakers, there probably is some different different views. A little bit the same, but probably more from policymakers. You get the idea that prostitution is something really that is private, and that isn't something necessarily that the law should be getting involved in, or that they as politicians, why should they speak into what people do in their private lives? As long as consenting adults are involved, then really they should leave it alone. And then you get a different perspective that comes in relation to women in prostitution, that sort of says, well, people are making a choice, and we need to respect people's choices, and we need to give people the freedom to make those choices if those are the choices that they make. So in addition to what Stuart said, those are some of the other attitudes that are kind of around amongst policymakers.
This is really fascinating. So we've got on the one hand a kind of a resistance and a kind of a reticence to even talk about it or think about it, and then there are those who have a more, as you said, Stuart, a compassionate heart in it, and then different attitudes among policymakers. Let's just move into section 2. We want to ground this in biblical principles. We want to just talk together about why CARE has taken up this cause, why we advocate in this area. Louise, I wonder if I could just come to you with a straightforward question. Why is CARE so passionate about seeing change in this particular area?
So many of CARE's policy areas are involved in upholding people's dignity and protecting people's dignity and protecting people from harm. And we want the country to have laws and policies in place that will do that will uphold the dignity of each person who we believe is made in the image of God, is an image bearer of the King. And we want to help our society to be structured in a way that will enable people to flourish and protect them also from any harm. And we see prostitution as something overall that causes harm to people. We know from the evidence that there are many risks inherent in prostitution. There's evidence of people experiencing violence. There are situations of damage to people physically and mentally just by the experience of prostitution, of what it involves physically and mentally. We have evidence of people becoming addicted to alcohol or other substances. Sometimes it's a bit of chicken and egg. They have an alcohol or substance misuse issue that leads them into prostitution. But then the experience of prostitution is so damaging for them psychologically that they retreat into substance misuse is a coping strategy, really, for that. So prostitution itself is damaging. We see evidence of that. But we also have evidence that often the people involved in prostitution have been vulnerable in the first place. And so prostitution is something that disproportionately has a negative impact on some of the more vulnerable people in society, people who have had broken childhoods, people who've experienced abuse as children, people who are just dealing with horrific poverty or other difficult circumstances and just need a way of making money. There's a common form of prostitution is described as survival sex, people who are sleeping rough, or they need a way to stay somewhere. Someone will say, oh, you can stay in my flat if, and these conditions around sexual activity are put in place. So prostitution is sort of a cause of harm, and in some ways is a result of people who are already harmed. So we want to see law that can do as best it can to eliminate as much of that harm for as many people as possible.
It's fantastic. Stuart, just picking up on image of God, and do you want to just speak to also God's heart for the vulnerable as well, that great emphasis? And is there anything from the example of Jesus that can be helpful and instructive if someone's watching just thinking, I'm still feeling a bit nervous about this issue and I just want a bit more biblical kind of content to convince me?
Absolutely. Jesus kind of grounds this whole idea of the image of God as it pertains to prostitution, I think, in a couple of interesting places. There's a great example in quite an obscure passage that people blew over. I blew over for a long time without really clocking the detail. In Matthew 21, goes from 28 to 32. And he's having this exchange with the religious leaders of the day who he's constantly battling with. He's poking them and they're angry and they're jealous at him. But he says to them, as they disdain the tax collectors and women in prostitution of the day. They saw these people as so far from anything to do with God. And Jesus says to them in this moment, he says, they actually, women in prostitution and the tax collectors, are going into the kingdom of heaven ahead of you, religious leaders. You think there's some pecking order. Well, there is a pecking order, and you're down there somewhere, and they're up there somewhere. So he reverses the expectations of the day. Everybody assumed these religious leaders were, oh yeah, they'll be first in the queue going into God's presence or whatever, come the end of the world or something like that. They're the ones in highest estimation in God's mind. But actually, Jesus is the other way around. He says these women, regardless of their social status, regardless of how you rank them spiritually, they're going into the kingdom of heaven ahead of you. Well, that's hugely instructive. Another story would be from Luke chapter 7, where there is a dinner party at one of these religious leaders' homes. Jesus has been invited, and there is a woman who breaks into the house. She's not been invited, and this woman is invariably understood to be a woman in prostitution. It doesn't explicitly say that, but she has often been understood throughout the Christian church to be involved in that. And she is so drawn to Jesus as a person. You know, invariably, men are a problem for women in prostitution, right? And yet here is this man. She's heard about this. She is drawn to him. She breaks into the house and she weeps over his feet. She uses her hair to dry his feet afterwards. It's a very textured and emotional moment. He is a safe person to her. And not only that, if you then go again to maybe Jesus' manifesto, which he preaches in Luke chapter 4, he's come to set captives free, you know, to break chains, to liberate people who are caught in a bind. The message of Jesus for women in prostitution, if we understand women to be ensnared, to be in a place of harm, as Louise described, Jesus is is creating something for our worldview for how to engage with this difficult social cause.
That's fantastic. And I think, you know, you take some of the Proverbs, you take some of the emphasis in the Old Testament as well of God calling on his people to look out for those who are more vulnerable than themselves. And you actually end up with quite a compelling biblical case for people in prostitution are image bearers of God. They're often vulnerable. Christ patterned an example that we are to follow. Given all of this, Louise, coming back to you, we know that there are major challenges in bringing about change when it comes to this particular policy area. Could you just briefly touch on why there are such challenges? What's behind that?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different challenges, so I'll probably just pick a couple. But the first one we've already spoken about a bit. It's to do with attitude. So you have politicians who just don't want to touch it. They know that it's a controversial area. Why should I put my head above the parapet by getting involved in this very difficult subject? And they have these ideas of, or, you know, should we be legislating for the private space and what goes on in people's private lives? Or they individualize it down to, you know, each individual situation without really looking at the broad scope of prostitution and its impact on society. We also, around attitudes, have the fact that there just are really competing and strongly voiced arguments in this area. And unfortunately, it's one of those issues where some of the people who are most damaged are therefore unable to have their voices heard because of what they've experienced in prostitution, because of the stigma that still surrounds it. Those people don't necessarily want to say, I am a person who has been through prostitution and I think it was harmful to me. Please change the law. Those people, most of them, if they've managed to get out of prostitution, just want to get on with their life. And they're not able to make their voices heard. For those who are still in prostitution and being damaged by it, their lives can often be very difficult, and they're not in a place to be able to make their voices heard. So The voices that tend to get heard are those of people who have more capacity. Those people that, from our perspective, from what we understand, are probably a minority of people in prostitution who have more capability, who are well educated. Those people who engaged in prostitution whilst doing a PhD at university, and they dipped in and they dipped out of it as they chose. Those are not the majority of people in prostitution in this country, but that is the majority voice that you will often hear. So that means the debate gets a bit skewed, because the voices of people who've been trafficked or people who are in really difficult situations just don't get brought to the fore. Although I have to say, there are some incredibly brave women who have been speaking out in recent years about their circumstances and their experience of prostitution, calling for change. And those of us who haven't had that experience are really just wanting to support and encourage them and draw alongside them in what they're trying to do. The other major, I was going to give you my other major challenge, but
of course,
do you want to ask a question?
Go ahead.
The other major challenge we have is that prostitution is something that often happens behind closed doors. In fact, mostly behind closed doors, facilitated via the internet, often nowadays, sometimes not even actually in person. We have versions of prostitution that can happen just over the internet. And so that can make it really difficult to get solid data. And governments want to make change that they describe as evidence-based. They want the evidence before making a change. And so if you don't have lots of really good, solid information and data about prostitution, that can make it really difficult to persuade government to make a change, and conversely makes it really easy for government to delay, for government to say, well, we don't really know, the evidence isn't really there. So it's a really easy get out for government to make a change because of the difficulty in getting really good information.
One of the questions that we sometimes get asked at CARE is, what change do we want to see? And I wonder if you know this already. Perhaps some of you joining us at Facebook and on YouTube are from Northern Ireland, and perhaps you are aware that in Northern Ireland it is, and Louise will correct my choice of words here if I stray but a single iota from what is accurate, but in Northern Ireland it is a criminal offence to purchase sex. So Northern Ireland is the only part of the United Kingdom where such a law exists. And this is a really obvious, easy question. Stuart, coming to you first. That's what we want to see in the other parts of the United Kingdom, including Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Scottish government has put up a consultation for us here in Scotland, which could afford us the same outcome. So, which is so exciting that, you know, there's this consultation on prostitution up here, and we want to see the same outcome as Northern Ireland. It would be amazing for us to follow their lead, and they've just done a brilliant job in stepping out and pursuing this and for social life there.
By the way, if you are interested in CARE's work in respect to human trafficking in Northern Ireland, please visit our website, care.org.uk, find the human trafficking cause section of our website, and you'll find more information there about our involvement there. Louise, coming to you, can you just, let's focus in on Scotland, as Stuart's mentioned it. What is this Scottish consultation on prostitution in Scotland? Its title is incredibly long: Equally Safe, a consultation on challenging men's demand for prostitution, working to prevent the harms associated with prostitution and helping women to exit. So no marks for a catchy title, but what exactly is this consultation? What's going on here?
Yeah, so just to give you the history, which might explain a little bit of the title, Scotland has a policy on preventing and addressing violence against women. That policy is called Equally Safe. That policy has been around for a number of years. It's been revised and updated over the years. But from its very first incarnation, that policy has included prostitution in its definition of commercial sexual exploitation, which is perceived by the strategy as a form of violence against women. And so because of that, it comes under all the elements of that strategy. So there's different things that strategy is trying to do in relation to all forms of violence against women, basically in reducing prevalence, in terms of educating people, in terms of protecting people who've experienced that violence, whatever it is, and in terms of addressing and responding to offenders of all kinds. And in some ways, the prostitution element of the understanding of violence against women has got a little bit left behind in some of the work that Scotland's been doing on some of the other aspects. And so this consultation is drawing from that understanding and moving it forward. So it is asking various different questions about how can Scotland better address prostitution, understanding it as a form of violence against women, and in particular looking at, which is in some ways one of the aspects of the strategy, how can we prevent the harm, the violence that comes through prostitution. And as part of that, it's looking at the demand for prostitution, because if you can reduce the demand for prostitution, then you would, in our view, reduce the amount of prostitution that's happening and therefore reduce the harm. But then there are other questions the consultation is also asking. It's asking questions around what can we do better to help people who are in prostitution to get out of prostitution and to build a new life? How can we respond better to people, to women specifically that are in prostitution? So it doesn't provide a suggestion for what the government is proposing to do in some of these areas. Some there are more solid proposals, but more generally, it's asking what people think. And there's one question really that's about the law. Other questions are about things like education of children and young people about issues around this issue, and then also supporting people to exit. Around the law, it's asking a question about what elements of law that we see in different models around the world, which of those and which elements of those would be most effective, do you, the person responding, think in addressing demand for prostitution and the harms that prostitution causes. So it lays out lots of different laws. There's all sorts of different kinds around the world. Broadly speaking, there are those that fall into the camp of more kind of regulating prostitution. So prostitution would be legal, brothels would be legal, they operate as businesses, but there are regulations in place set by government about how they have to operate in order to be licensed and so on. Then there are those related but not quite the same, which prostitution is tolerated. It's not illegal to have any role in prostitution. So it's not illegal to make money from somebody else being in prostitution. So it's not illegal to be a pimp, for want of a better word. It's not illegal necessarily to run a brothel. It's not illegal to be a person in prostitution offering sex for money. None of that is illegal, but there are less in terms of structures to formalize it. So people call that decriminalization generally. And they point to New Zealand as an example of that. It's actually more complicated if you look at the detail of the law in New Zealand, but we won't get into that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's all sorts of things in between, and the UK would slightly fall in between. At the other end, there's laws like those in Scandinavia and Sweden and Norway is where it kind of originated, where it's illegal to pay for sex, and it's illegal to profit from somebody else's prostitution. So it's illegal to run a brothel, for example. But there's no laws that would penalize a person themselves if they're selling sex. So the focus of the law is on the demand and those who profit from prostitution. And so these are presented in the consultation, and people are asked for their views.
If you're watching this, and Stuart, coming to you next, and you're thinking, wow, this is amazing, all of that expertise and knowledge and understanding, but it seems a bit daunting to me if you're asking me to respond to that consultation. Stuart, there is good news on that front. You tell us the good news.
Yes, there is very good news. We are going to be helping you to engage in this issue. We're going to have a bespoke campaign page with essentially a crib sheet on it for you to have data, have wording, have information by which you can compose a response to the Scottish Government. And we really want to help you do that. It'll be really easy to access, and we'll be sending you out the details of that campaign page so that you can make your response, and to make it as robust and as sensible as possible, because as Louise alluded to, it's quite tricky the way the consultation's been set up there. And so you'll be able to make your response. And so it's very, very exciting for us to share that with you and to get you involved in the process.
And now I'm going to also reach out to those of you watching who are from Scotland. If you want to receive up-to-date information on this particular consultation, Stuart, just could you run through some of the best ways that people can connect with updates on this?
Yes, please do get in touch with us. So you can get in touch with our social media pages. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email me at stuart.weir@care.org.uk and join our mailing list so we can send you out our regular Scottish news shots where we're just trying to trigger you in the specific moments to get involved in campaigns. There's loads going on in Scotland, not least this big issue, and we will get you all. Also, we have a bespoke Scottish mailing that goes out called Inform, where we will be where we try and give you biblical grounding, help you pray into issues, as well as helping you understand issues. And you can email me on that same email address and request that pack, Inform. And hopefully in the near future, we'll have one on this issue as well, that you can dig into it more deeply.
Fantastic. And by the way, if you are active on Facebook, then let me encourage you, strongly encourage you, if you're from Scotland and you want to stay informed on this particular cause, then please ask to join the Care for Scotland group on our Facebook page. It's the best way of connecting with Stuart, connecting with the Care team, and it's an opportunity to be able to talk in that group, in the privacy of that group, with fellow Care supporters about causes like this and many others. So please do ask to join the Care for Scotland Facebook group. So this is where we've travelled from. We've thought about this issue in the round and general attitudes to it. We've looked in more detail at some of the biblical principles why at Care we're so passionate about seeing positive change in this particular area, the laws that are going to prevent harm and uphold the dignity of women in prostitution. And we've talked about this consultation in Scotland and given you an assurance that a guide will be produced that will help you, if you're living in Scotland, to respond effectively to that from a clear Christian perspective. And just so that we are, beyond any shadow of a doubt, Louise, you mentioned the spectrum from decriminalisation all the way through to this Scandinavian country model, Norway and Sweden. It's sometimes called the Nordic model of how you address prostitution in law. Just beyond any shadow of a doubt for those watching, what does that involve, and why is it, again, that Care supports that approach?
Yeah, so Care supports the Nordic model because, as I said before, we want to have laws that we think will protect and prevent the most harm happening to the most people. And we think that focusing on the demand is the way to do that. Because if you can reduce the demand, you reduce the number of people involved in prostitution. And we know that the law isn't the only way to address demand, but the law sends a really clear signal. If something is illegal, it shows that it's not accepted in society. It makes people think twice about it. It makes it clear about what the attitude of society is and what it should be. And there have been surveys with people who are purchasing sex that say that a change in the law is something that would modify their behavior and would put them off. So we think that's the way to go. They've seen reductions in prostitution in Sweden when they first introduced the law. They've had evaluations in Norway that suggest that they think trafficking would have been more if they hadn't had the law. It's a little bit difficult in some ways on some of these things, as I said, in terms of data and information. But there's definite signs of things having changed in Norway and Sweden, and we think that's the way to go.
And I mean, wouldn't it be fantastic if one of the results of this consultation and Christians getting behind it and sending in their responses to the best of their ability, that would then lead, Stuart, to the law being changed in Scotland so that it was made a criminal offence to buy sex. We often say at CARE that people were made for purpose, not purchase. That would be a fantastic outcome, wouldn't it, Stuart?
Oh, an amazing outcome, because we want to see women, every woman, but women in prostitution, given that's our topic today, to become the best versions of themselves. And a law, as Louise has tried to unpack our desires, our hope that this is the best way by which to tackle this harm, would allow women to begin that process. And so women are made for purpose, not purchase. And we want to see men's attitudes change as well. So Scottish men need to understand that they cannot and should not think of women as being available for purchase. That is just bringing up our boys in an entirely poor way. And if we can address that through the law as well, that would be amazing too.
And again, just underneath all of this, you can't get away from it. It's inescapable, but it's so helpful. Image of God, that men, women, boys, girls, made in God's image, equal before God. It's so important that we ground our attitudes on this particular cause in that, incredible truth. We're just going to move, as we draw towards a close, we're just going to move into a Q&A section. We've pulled together a number of questions that we think are just helpful to bring some conclusions out, and also in particular some practical take-homes for those of you who are joining with us today on this CARE session. So Stuart, just coming to you first, briefly, what's the better story here? That's something we're passionate about at CARE. What's the better story? You've articulated it a bit already, but just again, what's the better story? What do we long to see change in this area?
We want to see women who are understood as purposeful and wonderful and not harmed. We want to see them in a place where they are prevented from being purchased, right? We want to see a law which restrains the worst kind of intent by men upon them, and to see a change. The laws can actually change people's minds. It might not change people's hearts, although I've been wondering about that, but it does change minds after a while. It can do. And so there is both a cause and effect there that this law can bring out if it follows all the way through, if we can see the consultation move to legislation. So this is our hope. This is our purpose, is to see women understood as purposeful, wonderful human beings, not to be exploited.
And Stuart, if someone watching wanted, a couple of practical examples of things they could do to help contribute toward this positive change, what could they do?
Yes, well, go onto our website. If you look very clearly for our causes page, you'll find commercial sexual exploitation, because I think one of the biggest things is people maybe don't understand the issue fully. It's quite complex. There is a great 3-part series on there called Not for Sale. It's meaty. There's plenty in there. You can take it one at a time. There's 3 different layers that add on or build on each other. Not for Sale is that long read. Take a look at that. It's really, really helpful, really clear, easy to access, but gets into the nuance. Secondly, what about writing to your MSPs, just maybe even in brief? Everybody in Scotland has 8 MSPs. Write to them, tell them how concerned you are about the social harm of commercial sexual exploitation. Put it on their radar. Let them know that you're concerned about it. But then thirdly, respond to this consultation using our campaign page, which will go live really soon. Use it to make a case, to tell the Scottish Government, look at this issue, we've got to do something about this. And maybe fourthly, make use of the resource pack tool page that we're going to send you at the end of this. And if you're watching this in retrospect, which I hope many of you will be, request it. Request it from my email address, and we'll get it to you, and get digging into some of the brilliant resources that are out there on how we can engage in this whole lot more intelligently and more informed.
Fantastic. And Louise, just coming to you now, it sort of touches on the same thing, but if I also want to get more people perhaps in my church kind of engaged in thinking about this, what are some of the practical things I might want to do?
You could start off just by talking to your friends about it. As we've said, this is a difficult subject. People hold different views. Maybe some people haven't thought about it before. So maybe start by talking to people who know you, who you trust, who trust you, who you can have an honest conversation without worrying about tripping over yourself, and just talk to them and see what they think and what they know. Why not invite Stuart to come and talk to your church, or to a special event, a smaller gathering of people who are particularly interested, and to unpack some of these issues more deeply. I think, as Stuart said, it's something that many of us in the church haven't thought about. And actually starting just to talk to people about it, maybe even mention, have you heard this this consultation's happening? What do you know about it? I watched this thing on the internet the other day and I was really impacted by it, and have a chat, and encourage others to respond to the consultation, to pray, and to think more deeply about the subject. There are some churches and some Christian ministries, as well as others in Scotland, that are involved in reaching out to people in prostitution. You might be able to contact them or find out more from them. I'm sure Stuart might be able to put you in touch. He's closer to things on the ground in Scotland than I am. But just to think about it some more, I think would be a really great start.
And if you just to say to everybody that you may be wondering, how can I learn more about this? How can I read more about this? And I'll touch on that in just a few moments. But I have just noticed that there is, in fact, something that is taking place in the Scottish Parliament next Wednesday, the 2nd of December at 6:30, I think it is, in the evening. Louise, do you want to just quickly say what that is, and can people watching join that?
Yeah, so there is a group of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who have been committed to changing things in this area for a number of years and have been working hard. They're what's called a cross-party group, and they are hosting a webinar online next Wednesday evening, really knowing that in the lead up to the consultation, there are some great speakers, someone from Sweden who I guess will be speaking about the Swedish experience. There's someone who I've met and heard speak before, who's someone who's been who had an experience of being in prostitution in Ireland, who's speaking, and it'll be a really great resource to just hear more issues. I'm sure it will be hard, just to warn you. Some of what will be said will be real and gritty, but it will really be eye-opening, I think, and help you get to understand some of the issues. As far as I know, anyone can sign up to join that online webinar. You go to the website, which we will be able to share with you, and you'll be able to sign up there on the cross-party groups page.
Fantastic. Sorry, Louise, I just lost your volume slightly at the end there, so forgive me for interrupting. Stuart, could you give us just a couple of specific prayer points? People want to go away and pray about this. Just give us a couple.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, pray for the consultation to bring overwhelming support for criminalizing payment for sex, to help women get the support they need who are in prostitution, and for women to be supported to exit safely. Pray for legislation to then follow the consultation and to go through in such a way that supports such a view. But then lastly, look, this is dark stuff. This is evil. We need to pray against dark powers that want to keep prostitution as the status quo is. And we need to pray that is foiled and that is broken. So those would be 3 for you.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say on behalf of everybody watching and joining us today, whether you're joining us live or you'll watch it later, I just want to thank you, Stuart, and you, Louise. I think everybody watching will have heard not only your expertise, but also your passion to see genuine change in this area. And that is so exciting. And I want to say to all of you who are joining us, thank you so much for being with us. We're so grateful. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll get updates about new content. If you're watching on Facebook and you're from Scotland, do ask to join the Care for Scotland Facebook group. And please like our Facebook page as well. That would be so exciting, because that way you'll be able to access even more content like this session. There's really good news for all of you who are registered for CAREsessions. If you've gone to Eventbrite and signed up for your free access, because we are going to send you some bespoke resources, including the links that have been mentioned throughout this session. So information about the Scottish Parliament event next week, or in 2 weeks' time rather, and also the Not for Sale series of long reads that's on our website. We're going to send all that and so much more, prayer points, books you can read, lots of information. That's going to be landing in your inboxes a little bit later on today. And one more thing, if you are joining us and you'd like, and you've loved this session, you'd like to join us again next week, there's good news. Next week on Thursday, 11 o'clock, is another care session, and we're going to be joined by Ian Henderson, the Chief Executive of Naked Truth. And we're going to be talking about preventing online harms. How can we better protect our young people from harm online? So I do hope you'll be able to join us for that. And as ever, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been great to be with you, and we look forward to being with you in a week's time.